Some betrayals run so deep, they change not just your heart, but your entire destiny. Mine happened on a cold December night in 1965 when I discovered that the two people I trusted most were living a lie that would destroy everything I believed to be true. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my dears. Before I begin my story today, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for the 67,000 subscribers this channel has reached. I'm immensely grateful for each of you who chooses to spend time with me, listening to my life stories. I'd love to know what kind of stories you enjoy hearing most. Please tell me in the comments, as I have many stories tucked away in my memory chest and want to share those that touch your hearts the most. While you're at it, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where you're watching from. It would bring me such joy to know that people from different places are hearing my story. Now, I'll tell a story that profoundly marked my life. Some betrayals run so deep, they change not just your heart, but your entire destiny. I was born in 1947 in a small town called Millfield in rural Pennsylvania. It was a different time, when women had very few choices in life. I grew up hearing that our destiny was to marry, have children, and take care of the home. And so I did, like all young women my age. At 19 in 1962, I married Harold Thompson, a hard-working young man I met at a church social. He was 24, handsome, from a good family, and worked at the local general store. My parents immediately approved of the marriage. My father, Mr. William, was a stern man, respected in the community. He owned a small tobacco farm, the main product of our region. My mother, Mrs. Eleanor, was like so many women of that era, quiet, obedient, accustomed to swallowing any problem to keep peace in the home. Our house was simple but comfortable in the more urban part of town. On weekends, we would visit my parents at the farm, which was about half an hour from town. Harold got along very well with my father, and always offered to help him with the heavier tasks. I felt proud seeing how they understood each other, how my husband respected my father. The first years of marriage were peaceful. I took care of the house, did sewing work on the side to supplement our income, and dreamed of the day we would have children. Harold was attentive, bringing me small gifts sometimes, a hair ribbon, a sweet from the bakery. It wasn't the passionate love from romance novels, but it was what I knew, what I expected from life. In those days, things were different. We didn't have telephones at home. Television was a rarity, and news traveled slowly. The world turned at a different pace. People married for life, regardless of what happened. Divorce was the forbidden word, a shame for any family. By 1965, we had been married for 3 years, and I was beginning to worry that I hadn't yet become pregnant. The neighbors were already whispering. My mother-in-law asked indirect questions about grandchildren. Harold said he didn't mind, that it would happen when God willed it. I prayed every night, asking for a child. It was that winter when things began to change. December 1965 was particularly cold in our region. Heavy frost every morning, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and doesn't leave, no matter how many wool blankets you use. Harold began leaving earlier for work. "I need to organize the inventory before the customers arrive," he would say. He also started coming home later. "Your father needs help preparing for the harvest. I'm going to the farm after work." I believed him. Why wouldn't I? Trust was the foundation of our marriage, or so I thought. But small things began to bother me. A different smell on his clothes. It wasn't a woman's perfume. It was something I couldn't identify. Letters he quickly hid when I entered the room, whispered conversations with my father that stopped abruptly when I approached. I also began to notice changes in my father. He, who had always been austere, now smiled more, seemed lighter. My mother, on the other hand, was quieter than normal, more tense. When I asked if everything was all right, she would only say, "Just getting old, daughter. One gets old, the body aches." I remember every night lying in bed, hearing Harold snore beside me while I stared at the dark ceiling, feeling that something was wrong, but unable to understand what. That sensation, that there's a shadow in the house, a secret hidden in the walls, but you can't see it clearly. In the community, we were seen as a perfect family. Harold was praised for being so helpful to my father. Sons-in-law like that don't exist anymore, the ladies at church would say. I would smile, thank them, and keep my concerns to myself. Once I found a handkerchief in Harold's suit pocket. It wasn't mine. It had the initials WM embroidered in the corner. William Miller, my father. When I asked, Harold said my father had lent it to him on a cold day. It made sense. But why did my heart race? Life continued at its apparently normal rhythm. On Sundays, we would go to church, then have lunch at the farm with my parents. My mother would prepare the traditional beef stew that she seasoned herself. Afterward, the men would talk on the porch, having their coffee, while we women washed the dishes and gossiped about the town's happenings. It was during one of those Sunday afternoons that I noticed how my father looked at Harold. It wasn't the look of a father-in-law to a son-in-law. It was something more, something that made me feel a chill down my spine. When our eyes met, my father quickly looked away, feigning interest in the tobacco field in the distance. That night, I couldn't sleep. The pieces were beginning to fit together, but my mind refused to form the complete picture. It was too absurd, too impossible. Not in our family, not in our town, not in that era. The following Wednesday, I was at home sewing a dress for the neighbor's daughter. When I heard knocks at the door, it was my mother, paler than I had ever seen her before. Her hands were trembling, and there was a look in her eyes that frightened me. "May I come in, dear?" she asked, her voice breaking. I made coffee for us both. She sat at the kitchen table, holding the cup with her wrinkled hands, but she didn't drink. The silence weighed between us like a heavy cloud before a storm. "Martha, I need to tell you something, but I don't know how," she finally said, taking a deep breath like someone gathering courage to plunge into ice-cold water. "I went to take food to your father in the back barn last night. The light was off, but I heard voices." My mother stopped. Silent tears streamed down her aged face. I already knew what would come next. My heart already knew, but my mind was still fighting against the truth. I recognized Harold's voice. They didn't see me. I saw your husband and your father together, daughter." She didn't need to explain more. The world stopped spinning in that instant. It was as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet, as if all the air had been sucked from my lungs. "Are you sure, Mom?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer, even though I had already seen the signs that I had refused to interpret. "I am, daughter. It's not the first time. I've suspected for months. The looks, the meetings. Your father changed with me, and now I understand why." I cried, embraced with my mother that afternoon like I had never cried before. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the lie, the deception, the years lived in a farce. It was the shame, the humiliation of knowing that perhaps others also knew or suspected. It was knowing that the two people I trusted most, my husband and my father, had conspired to deceive me, to deceive my mother. "I won't live like this anymore, daughter," my mother said with a firmness that surprised me, coming from that woman who had always been so submissive. "And you shouldn't either." That night, I didn't sleep. Harold arrived late as usual, inventing the same excuse as always. I pretended I was asleep, unable to look at him, unable to confront him yet. I needed to be sure, needed to see with my own eyes. And that's what I did the next day. I told Harold I was going to visit a client on the other side of town. Instead, I went to my father's farm. I knew at that hour he should be working in the barn where he stored the dried tobacco. I approached silently, my heart beating so hard I thought it could be heard from a distance. I entered through the back, hid behind the hay bales. I didn't have to wait long. My father was there. And soon Harold arrived. I saw when they embraced, when they kissed, saw the intimacy between them, the familiarity of gestures that made it clear this had been happening for a long time. I felt disgust, anger, humiliation. But mainly I felt a determination growing inside me. I returned home with a fire in my chest that I had never felt before. The tears had dried, giving way to a cold, calculated anger. When my mother arrived later, she saw my look and immediately understood. "You saw too, didn't you?" she asked. I just nodded. "We're not leaving like fugitives," I said, feeling a strength I didn't know I possessed. "They betrayed us, deceived us, lived a lie at our expense. They should be the ones to feel ashamed, not us." It was at that moment, sitting at the kitchen table with my mother, two women betrayed in the worst possible way, that we decided we would not be silent victims. We would not accept that destiny of quiet humiliation that society expected of us. Our revenge was just beginning. That night was the longest of my life. Sitting in the living room with my mother until dawn, we planned every detail of what we would do. I don't know where so much strength came from. Perhaps from anger, perhaps from desperation, or perhaps it had always been there inside us, waiting for the right moment to awaken. "We're not leaving like fugitives," I repeated to my mother, seeing in her eyes the same fire that burned inside me. "We will leave, yes, but on our terms." I looked at the calendar hanging on the kitchen wall. We were in mid-December, and at the end of the month we would have the Christmas service, the biggest event of the year in Millfield. The entire community would gather at the church and then for the community lunch. The mayor would be there, the judge, the sheriff, all the important families of the region. It would be the perfect stage. We had just over 10 days to prepare. My mother and I continued our routines as if nothing had happened. I served breakfast to Harold. I smiled when he lied about working late. My mother took care of the house, prepared meals for my father, listened to his invented stories about work on the farm. With each of their lies, our determination grew. We met during the day while they were out to organize our departure. My mother began to gather the money she had saved over the years, savings from small sewing jobs she did, from eggs she sold in secret, from change she managed to save from grocery money. It was little, but it would be enough for us to start anew. "I always knew I would need this someday," she told me, showing the cookie tin where she hid the money, buried in the yard under the rose bush. "I never imagined it would be for this reason." And we sent a letter to my Aunt Dorothy, my mother's younger sister who lived in Pittsburgh. We didn't tell her everything, just that we would need a place to stay for some time. She responded quickly, saying her home would always be open to us. I bought 2 bus tickets to Pittsburgh dated for the night of the Christmas service. The seller at the bus station looked at me curiously. It wasn't common for women to travel alone, much less on a holiday. I made up a story about a sick cousin who needed care. He didn't question further. At home, I began to discreetly separate some clothes, family photographs, important documents, nothing that could raise suspicions. I sewed internal pockets in an old skirt where I hid our documents and part of the money. In those days, women didn't have bank accounts, didn't have access to credit or loans without the authorization of their husband or father. All we had was what we could hide. My mother did the same at the farm. Each day she brought a small object of sentimental value. Her grandmother's rosary, a gold brooch she received at her wedding, the wedding ring she no longer wore because her fingers had thickened with age, small treasures that would carry our history. The hardest part was keeping up appearances. On the Sundays leading up to the service, we went to church as always. We sat in the same wooden pew, listened to Pastor Johnson's sermon, greeted acquaintances on the way out. Harold and my father behaved like the respectable men everyone thought they were. I remember one of those Sundays when Mrs. Patterson, the pharmacist's wife, approached after the service. "Martha, are you well? You look pale," she asked, genuinely concerned. I smiled. I lied about sleepless nights, about headaches. I lied as well as I had learned to lie in those last few weeks. The strangest thing was how life continued around us, oblivious to the earthquake that had destroyed our world. The baker still made the same bread every morning. Children still played in the square. The church bells still rang on the hour. Only we two knew that nothing would ever be the same. 3 days before the service, I had an idea. I went to the pharmacy and bought a bottle of sleeping pills. the kind sold to nervous women. The pharmacist didn't hesitate to sell them to me, especially when I mentioned my supposed insomnia crises. In those days, no one questioned a fragile woman needing tranquilizers. On the eve of the Christmas service, my mother insisted on being the one to make the announcement in church. "You're young, daughter. You have your whole life ahead of you. If something goes wrong, if someone reacts badly, let it be with me." I didn't agree. We would do it together, as we had planned. That night, I slept beside Harold for the last time. He slept peacefully, not knowing I was awake, observing his face in the weak light of the moon coming through the window. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of doubt. What if we were wrong? What if there was another explanation? But then I remembered the scenes I had witnessed in the barn, the constant lies, the years lived in a farce. No, we weren't wrong. And even if there was another explanation, they had had enough time to tell us the truth. The morning of the Christmas service dawned cold, but with a surprisingly clear sky for December. I got up early, prepared coffee as always. Harold commented on how beautiful I looked, on how the blue dress I chose for the service matched my eyes. I thanked him like the loving wife he thought I still was. My mother arrived early so we could go to church together. She wore her best dress, the one she saved for special occasions, and the gold brooch that had belonged to my grandmother. Her face had a serenity I had never seen before. We took our small suitcases to Mrs. Jenkins' house, a trusted neighbor. I left a note saying we would pick them up later after lunch. She wouldn't be home either. She was also going to the service, but she had a copy of the key. This kind of arrangement between neighbors was common in those days. The church was packed when we arrived. Entire families occupied the wooden pews. Restless children were reprimanded with stern looks from their mothers. The aroma of incense filled the air. My father and Harold were already there, waiting for us in the usual place, third pew on the right. The service followed its ritual as always. Pastor Johnson spoke about unity, about family, about the Christian values that should guide our community. Each word sounded like a cruel irony to my ears. I looked at my mother, who clutched her rosary between her fingers, her lips moving in silent prayers. When the time came for the offering, when families went to the altar to deliver their donations, I felt my heart accelerate. It was now. My mother stood up first. I followed her. We walked slowly down the central aisle, feeling the community's eyes upon us. Pastor Johnson received us with a smile, extending the basket to receive our offerings. But instead of depositing the money and returning to our place as we did every Sunday, my mother took a step forward. "Pastor Johnson," she spoke, her voice clear and firm, loud enough for everyone in the church to hear, "I have a public confession to make." An absolute silence fell over the church. I saw out of the corner of my eye when my father and Harold straightened their postures, their faces suddenly pale. I discovered that my husband, William, and my daughter's husband, Harold, have betrayed us, my mother continued, each word weighing like lead in the motionless air of the church. Not with other women, but with each other. They have been having an affair for months while pretending to be devoted husbands to us. The whispers began immediately, growing like a wave that swept through the church pews. I saw shocked faces, hands covering mouths open in astonishment, looks that alternated between us and the two men who now tried to hide, shrinking in their places. "Martha and I have come today to say that we no longer accept living in this lie," my mother continued, her voice ever firmer. "We leave these men behind along with the disloyalty that is theirs, not ours." It was my turn to speak. I stepped forward, feeling a courage I didn't know I possessed. "We are not the ones who should hang our heads in this town," I said, looking directly at the congregation. "It's them who betrayed the women they swore to honor and protect, to live their affair in secret." Pastor Johnson was paralyzed, his face a mask of shock. No one moved, no one spoke. It was as if time had frozen inside that church. Then, with the same dignity with which we entered, my mother and I turned around and walked to the exit. Our steps echoed in the sepulchral silence that had fallen over the church. I felt the gazes following us. I heard the murmurs that were beginning to grow behind us. I didn't look back. I didn't see the reaction of my father or of Harold. I didn't need to see. I knew that at that moment their worlds were crumbling in the same way that ours had crumbled days before. The morning sun greeted us when we opened the church doors. The contrast between the darkness of the interior and the brightness of the day made me blink. It was as if we were emerging from a long tunnel, finally seeing the light. We went straight to Mrs. Jenkins' house, got our suitcases, and headed for the bus station. We didn't go back home, didn't pick up anything beyond what we had already separated. There was nothing there worth more than our dignity. At the bus station, we bought 2 coffees and waited for the bus that would take us to Pittsburgh. Sitting side by side on the wooden bench, we observed the movement of the small town we would soon leave behind. "Do you think we did the right thing, Mom?" I asked, a last pang of doubt hitting me. She took my hand between hers, those hands that had worked so much, that had endured so much. "We did what needed to be done, daughter. The truth is like a difficult birth. It hurts, it bleeds, but it's the only path to life." The bus arrived punctually at 2 p.m. We handed our tickets to the driver, a middle-aged man who barely looked at us, accustomed to anonymous travelers. We chose seats in the back, away from the other passengers. When the engine roared and the bus began to move, I felt a mixture of fear and relief. We were leaving behind everything we knew, our home, our town, our life. But we were taking with us something much more valuable: our dignity, our truth, our newly discovered courage. I looked out the window one last time at Millfield, at the streets I had known since childhood, at the church steeple that was now receding in the distance. I knew I would never return. I also knew that the story of what happened in that church would spread like wildfire, that it would be told and retold, that it would be the scandal of the year, perhaps of the decade. We left behind a social earthquake whose aftershocks they would feel for a long time. But that was no longer our problem. Our revenge was consummated, not with violence, not with screams, but with the raw, simple truth exposed to daylight before the entire community. The road to Pittsburgh was long, almost 4 hours by road. I slept part of the journey, exhausted by the weight of the last days, by the accumulated tension, by the adrenaline that now abandoned my body. When I woke up, we were already entering the city. The lights of the big city shone against the darkening sky, a new world opening before us. My Aunt Dorothy was waiting for us at the bus station, concerned about our mysterious phone call, about our sudden arrival. Later, we would tell her the whole story. For now, the tight embrace, the silent welcome, the implicit promise of a new beginning was enough. That night, lying on the makeshift bed in my aunt's living room, looking at the unfamiliar ceiling, I realized I had ceased to be the Martha everyone knew, the dedicated wife, the obedient daughter, the woman who accepted her destiny without questioning. That Martha had been left behind in the church in Millfield. Who I would be now in this new life that was opening before me was still a mystery. But one thing I knew for certain: I would never again allow anyone to dictate my worth, my truth, or my destiny. The first days in Pittsburgh were a blur of contradictory emotions. The relief of having escaped mixed with the fear of the unknown. The satisfaction of the consummated revenge alternated with moments of doubt about the future. My Aunt Dorothy's house, a simple 2-story home in the East Liberty neighborhood, became our temporary refuge. Dorothy was 15 years younger than my mother and different from her in almost every aspect. She had never married, worked as a secretary in a law firm, and lived alone, something scandalous by our family's standards. Now I understand that she was our first vision of how a woman could be independent. But at the time, we just thanked her for her generosity. "You can stay as long as you need," she told us that first night, serving chamomile tea in her small kitchen. She didn't ask questions, didn't demand immediate explanations, just offered us shelter, food, and silence. In the second week, when we had rested a bit from the physical and emotional journey, we told her the whole story. Dorothy listened without interruptions, her eyes widening at some moments, nodding with understanding at others. "You did what many would like to have done, but never had the courage," she commented when we finished. "Now you need to think about tomorrow." Tomorrow, a word I had always taken for granted, but that now hung like a big question mark. What could two women without husbands, without property, with little formal education and limited savings do in a big city like Pittsburgh in 1965? Dorothy helped us find a room to rent not far from her house. It was small, with a double bed we would share, a 2-burner stove, a table with 2 chairs, and an old wardrobe. The bathroom was shared with other tenants in the hallway. It seemed like misery compared to what we had before, but it represented something precious. It was our space, conquered with our own money. In January 1966, we started working. My mother got a job as a cleaning lady in family homes in the neighborhood. I, with my sewing skills, began to do small repairs and adjustments for a nearby clothing store. The money was little, just enough for rent and simple food, but each penny represented our newly conquered independence. The nights were the most difficult moments. After an exhausting day of work, lying in the narrow bed, sometimes we allowed ourselves to cry. Not from regret, never from regret, but from the mourning of an entire life we had left behind. My mother at 58 had deeper wrinkles now, her hair whitening rapidly, her hands calloused from the heavy work she had never done before. "Was it worth it, daughter?" she asked me one night, her voice almost a whisper in the darkness of the room. "It was, Mom," I responded without hesitating. "We are poor, we are tired, but we are living in truth. That has no price." About 2 months after our arrival, we received the first news from Millfield. A letter from Margaret, my cousin who still lived there. I opened it with trembling hands, my mother at my side, both fearing and yearning for news. Margaret described the chaos we had left behind. Our revelation in the church had been just the beginning. After we left, there was confusion, shouting, denials. My father tried to claim we were crazy, that we had invented everything. Harold simply fled the church, unable to face the accusing looks. In the days that followed, the story ran through town like wildfire. What before were just sighs and glances between two men, something that could be hidden and denied, was now exposed to daylight, impossible to ignore. My father lost customers at the farm. People refused to buy his tobacco. Harold was fired from the store where he worked. Both became pariahs in the community that once respected them. Pastor Johnson tried to intervene, speaking about forgiveness and understanding, but even the church couldn't stifle the scandal. "Your father is selling parts of the farm to survive," wrote Margaret. "Harold was last seen boarding a bus to Ohio. They say he couldn't stand the shame." I read the letter aloud to my mother. When I finished, we remained in silence for a long time. There was no joy in knowing of their suffering, just a strange sensation of justice being fulfilled. "They sowed the wind. They reap the whirlwind," my mother finally said, quoting the Bible she knew so well. That letter was a closure, a period at the end of the previous chapter of our lives. Now we could look forward without the weight of the past pulling us back. By the end of 1966, with the approach of Christmas, we took our next step. My mother had saved a small extra amount making cakes and sweets for parties. I continued with the sewing work, now serving some private clients that Dorothy had introduced me to. We combined our savings and rented a larger space, a back apartment with 2 small bedrooms, living room, kitchen, and private bathroom. It was modest, but represented enormous progress. Most importantly, it had an extra room where we could work. We bought a used sewing machine, paid in 12 installments. It was our first major investment. My mother painted a simple sign, "Repairs and Adjustments, Eleanor and Martha." We hung it in the window facing the street and waited for someone to notice. The first clients were curious neighbors. We did hems, adjusted waistlines of dresses, replaced zippers. Simple work, but done with care. Soon, the word spread. "The seamstresses in the back know what they're doing," they said. Gradually, we began to receive orders for new clothes, not just repairs. By mid-1966, we already had a small, loyal clientele. My mother, who always had a special talent for cakes and sweets, began taking orders to complement our income. Our house sometimes smelled of sugar and cinnamon in the morning, and of fabric and thread in the afternoon. It was during this time that I met Helen, a young teacher who had recently moved to Pittsburgh. She came to adjust a dress, and we ended up talking for hours. She was educated, independent, full of ideas about the future, about women's rights, about a world I could barely imagine. Helen became a friend and frequent client. Through her, we met other women, teachers, nurses, secretaries, women who worked, who had their own money, who made choices. A universe so different from what I knew in Millfield. In 1967, Helen brought us an idea that would change our lives. She taught at a school for girls from rural areas who came to study in the city. Many of these girls stayed in expensive boarding houses or with families who exploited them. "You have space here. Why not host 1 or 2 students? You would have extra income and would help these girls," she suggested. The idea seemed absurd at first. Our apartment was small. There was barely space for the 2 of us, but the more we thought about it, the more sense it made. We could reorganize the rooms, perhaps even look for a larger place if it worked out. In February 1968, we received our first boarder. Lucy, 18, came from Erie to study nursing. She was shy, frightened by the big city, grateful to find a welcoming environment. We charged a fair price for the lodging, which included breakfast and dinner prepared by my mother. Lucy brought new life to our house. Her stories about the college, her dreams and ambitions made us remember that there was an entire world out there beyond the walls of our small apartment. In the second semester, we received another student, Mary, who came from Harrisburg to study accounting. With 2 boarders, the apartment became cramped but cozy. The girls helped with small household tasks, and in exchange, my mother took care of them as if they were family. At Christmas 1968, our table had 4 places: me, my mother, Lucy, and Mary. We made a simple but abundant meal. We sang, exchanged small gifts, toasted with cheap wine. It was the first truly happy Christmas since we left Millfield. In 1969, the sewing business prospered enough for us to hire a helper. Antoinette was a widow who lived in the same neighborhood and had skill with needle and thread. With her, we could accept more orders, including party dresses and simple suits. In early 1970, we made an important decision: to move to a larger house. With the savings of the last few years and a small loan that Dorothy helped us secure, we rented an old house in the same neighborhood. It had 4 bedrooms, a spacious living room, a large kitchen, and a small backyard. We renovated the place with our own hands, painted walls, sanded the old floor, sewed new curtains. The front room was transformed into our sewing atelier with 2 machines now, the old one and a new one bought outright with the money we had saved. In March 1970, we officially inaugurated the Seamstresses Boarding House, as the girls affectionately called our home. We could accommodate up to 6 students, besides the 2 of us and Antoinette, who ended up moving into a small room in the back. The news spread among the college students. Soon we had a waiting list for vacancies. Our differential was the family environment, my mother's home cooking, the location close to downtown, and the fair price. The girls' stories filled the house with life and hope. They were young women who studied, who dreamed of careers, who spoke of an America in transformation, even under the weight of the political turmoil of the late 60s. Through them, we learned about new music, different ideas, ways of seeing the world that we would never have accessed in our old life. My mother, who was now in her 60s, seemed to rejuvenate in the company of the students. She taught them to cook simple dishes, to mend their own clothes, to take care of a house. In exchange, they taught her to read better. My mother had always had little formal education, and to understand the world that was rapidly changing around us. On a July night in 1970, sitting on the porch of our new house, observing the movement of the street, I realized how far we had come in the 5 years since we left Millfield. From 2 frightened women without prospects, carrying only dignity and some savings, We had transformed ourselves into businesswomen, small, modest, but still owners of our own business, of our own destiny. The pain of betrayal never completely disappeared. There were nights when I still woke up thinking about Harold, about how I had been deceived, about how our life could have been different. But these nights became increasingly rare. The present was too full, too rich in new experiences to stay stuck in the past. Our revenge, that public confession in the church, had been just the beginning of our true liberation. The real revenge, I realized then, was not the exposure of their betrayal, but the life we built afterward, a life we would never have had if we had continued trapped in that lie. The decade of 1970 arrived, bringing winds of change for America and for our small, great achievement in Pittsburgh. Our boarding house for students prospered, as did the sewing atelier. What began as a necessity for survival had transformed into a legitimate business, supporting not just us, but also creating opportunities for other women. In March 1971, we received a letter that would again change the course of our lives. It was from Margaret, my cousin from Millfield, the same one who had informed us about the fate of my father and Harold years before. I opened the envelope with trembling hands, sitting at the kitchen table while my mother prepared breakfast for our 6 boarders. "Uncle William passed away last week," the letter said. "He was found at home, alone. The doctor said it was his heart. The farm is abandoned. Almost everything was sold to pay debts, but the house and a piece of land still remain. Since you are the legal heirs, you need to come resolve the situation." I read the letter in a low voice to my mother, away from the ears of the girls who were getting ready to go to college. She remained silent for a long moment, her hands still over the cake batter she was preparing. "I feel nothing," she finally said, "neither sadness nor relief. It's as if I were reading about a stranger." I understood perfectly. The man we once called husband and father had become a distant character, almost fictional in our new lives. His death was just a fact, not a loss. Still, there were practical matters to resolve. As legal heirs, we needed to decide what to do with what remained of his assets. After much discussion, we decided that I would go alone to Millfield. My mother would stay taking care of the boarding house and the atelier. "I don't have the strength to return to that place," she told me. "Besides, someone needs to take care of the girls and the orders." I departed on a rainy April morning, my heart heavy not for my father's death, but for the return to a place that represented so much suffering. The bus traveled the same road that brought us to freedom 6 years before, only now in the opposite direction. Millfield seemed both familiar and strange. The same streets, the same houses, the same church where our life changed forever. But I was no longer the same Martha who left there that Sunday of the Christmas service. I was a different woman who returned now, stronger, more secure, owner of her own destiny. I stayed at Margaret's house, refusing invitations from other relatives who, curious, wanted to know details of our life in Pittsburgh. The news of my return spread quickly. I felt the looks, the whispers when I passed on the street. Some changed their path to avoid greeting me. Others came with questions disguised as concern. The lawyer who handled the estate received me with excessive formality. He explained that my father had sold almost everything to pay gambling and drinking debts. What remained was the house, quite deteriorated, and a small piece of land that wasn't worth much. "And Harold? Any news of him?" I asked, trying to sound casual. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, uncomfortable. "No one knows for certain. There are rumors that he was in Ohio for a time. Some say he returned to Pennsylvania, but to another region. He never appeared around here again." I visited the farm the next day. The house where my parents had lived for decades was almost in ruins. The roof had holes, the windows were broken, the weeds grew high around it. The barn where I witnessed the scene that changed our lives was still standing but leaning, as if it too was tired of keeping secrets. I walked around the property, feeling a strange mixture of emotions. There, my mother was born. There, I spent my childhood running between the tobacco plantations. There I imagined that one day I would raise my own children. Now it was just an abandoned place, full of ghosts that no longer frightened me. I decided to sell everything. There was no reason to keep those lands, that house loaded with painful memories. The lawyer quickly found a buyer, a neighboring farmer who wanted to expand his property. The value wasn't much, but it represented a new beginning, a way to transform the legacy of betrayal into something positive. Before leaving, I made one last visit to the church. It was that time in the afternoon when there was just the caretaker sweeping the stone floor. I sat in the same pew where so many times I had sat beside Harold, pretending to be a perfect family. The altar, the images of the saints, the crucifix, all the same, as if time hadn't passed, as if the scandal we staged had never happened. Pastor Johnson found me there, sitting in silence. He was older, his hair completely white now. He sat beside me, respecting my silence for a few minutes. "I heard about your father's death," he finally said. "My condolences." I thanked him with a nod. "You did the right thing," he continued, surprising me. At that time, I was shocked. Of course, we all were, but with time I realized it was an act of courage. The truth is not always comfortable, but it is always the way. His words were an unexpected balm. We didn't need approval, my mother and I, but knowing that someone, especially someone like Pastor Johnson, understood our decision brought a sense of closure that I didn't know I still needed. I returned to Pittsburgh 3 days later, carrying with me the money from the sale and a renewed certainty that we had made the right choice, even with all the suffering, even with all the difficulties. My mother was waiting for me at the bus station, anxious for news. I told her about the sale, about the state of the farm, about people's reactions in the town. I kept Pastor Johnson's words to myself. She didn't need his approval or that of any other person. Her own strength was validation enough. With the money from the sale, we made a decision that had been maturing for some time, to buy our own house instead of continuing to pay rent. We found an old 2-story house in the same neighborhood, needing renovations but spacious and well located. It was perfect for our purposes, the boarding house, the atelier, and our residence. The purchase of the house marked a new chapter in our lives. For the first time, we had something truly our own, built with our work and determination. The property deed issued in the name of Eleanor Miller and Martha Thompson represented more than a piece of paper. It was the tangible proof of our independence. The renovations occupied the rest of 1971. We transformed the ground floor into a spacious sewing atelier with room for 3 machines and an area to serve clients. The rooms on the second floor were adapted to accommodate up to 8 students. We reserved for ourselves the small apartment in the back with 2 bedrooms, living room, kitchen, and a garden that my mother filled with plants and flowers. As the 70s advanced, our small business grew along with the changes in the country. The economic boom created a new urban middle class, eager for quality services. Our atelier no longer just did repairs and adjustments, but also made custom clothes for special occasions, graduation dresses, suits for job interviews, outfits for parties. In 1973, we hired 2 full-time seamstresses to help with the growing demand. Antoinette, our first employee, now supervised their work while I took care of customer service and my mother managed the boarding house. It was in this same year that I met Robert, a university professor who came to the atelier to adjust a suit jacket. He was a widower, had 2 grown children, and pleasant conversation. We began to meet casually, a coffee after work, a movie on Sundays, small walks in the park. At 30, I had already given up on the idea of forming a traditional family. The trauma of Harold's betrayal had created in me a deep distrust, a fear of giving myself again. But Robert was different, patient, respectful, without pressures or expectations. Our relationship grew slowly, built on honest conversations and mutual respect. He understood my history, my scars, my commitment to the business I had built with my mother. He didn't ask me to be different, to assume roles I didn't want to assume. In 1975, Robert asked me to marry him. I hesitated, not for lack of love, but for fear of losing the hard-won independence. We talked frankly about this. "I don't want a traditional wife," he told me. "I want a partner who continues to be exactly who she is." I married in October of that year, in a simple ceremony in the garden of our house. My mother, the students from the boarding house, our employees, Robert's children, a different family built by choice, not by obligation or convention. I didn't move to Robert's house as would be expected. Instead, he moved into our small apartment in the back. "The women of the family come first," he would say, respecting the space we had built, the business that was our livelihood and our identity. In 1976, at 33, I discovered I was pregnant. It was a surprise. I believed I would never have children, that this dream had been left behind, along with so many other things when I left Millfield. The pregnancy brought fears and insecurities, but also a joy that I hadn't imagined possible. My daughter Sophia was born in February 1977, bringing new light to our house. My mother, now a grandmother, had renewed energy to rock her granddaughter, sing lullabies, knit small clothes. The students from the boarding house took turns helping with the baby, enchanted with the little one who grew among university books and fabric scraps. The business continued to prosper, even with my attention divided between work and motherhood. We hired a manager for the atelier, a former student of the boarding house who had graduated in business administration. Under her supervision, we expanded the services, bought new equipment, modernized processes. The boarding house, in turn, became a reference among students who came from rural areas. We had a waiting list, recommendations from former residents, a reputation for a safe and welcoming environment. My mother, now in her 70s, still personally supervised breakfast, ensuring that each girl left well-fed to face the day of classes. In 1979, we received unexpected news. A letter arrived addressed to me without a return address. I immediately recognized the handwriting. It was from Harold. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope, unsure about what I would find inside. The letter was brief. "Martha, I found out by chance about your address. I am ill. I probably don't have much time. I just wanted to say that I regret the suffering I caused. I don't ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I recognize the harm I did. Harold." I showed the letter to my mother. She read it in silence, returned it without comments, and went back to stirring the sauce she was preparing for dinner. There was nothing more to say, nothing to feel. That man who was once my husband was now just a stranger whose suffering no longer touched us. I didn't respond to the letter, didn't try to find out more details about Harold's illness or his whereabouts. That page of my life had been turned long ago. I had a daughter to raise, a business to manage, a life I had built with my own hands, brick by brick. The year 1980 arrived bringing new challenges and joys. Sophia, at 3, was a curious and lively child, enchanted with the sewing machines, with the students who came and went, with the books that Robert brought for her. Our house, always full of female voices, of laughter, of shared stories, was a universe apart, a small oasis of possibilities in a world that still struggled to recognize the value and power of women. When I looked back at the frightened young woman I once was, at the courageous decision that my mother and I took in that packed church, I felt a mixture of pride and gratitude. The road had not been easy. There had been nights of crying, days of doubt, moments of despair, but each obstacle overcome, each small victory brought us here. Owners of our own destiny, builders of our own history. The revenge we planned in 1965, driven by the pain of betrayal, ended up being much more than the public humiliation of two men who deceived us. It was the first step toward a liberation we didn't know was possible, toward a life we would never have known if we had continued trapped in that lie. The price of truth was high. We lost a house, a town, an identity. But the value of the freedom we conquered, that had no price. It was the true inheritance we would pass on, not just to my daughter, but to each young woman who passed through our boarding house, to each woman who worked in our atelier, to anyone who crossed our path and saw that it was possible, Yes, to rebuild life from the rubble, that it was possible to transform pain into strength, betrayal into liberation. The 1980s arrived with the wind of change blowing strongly through America. While the country transformed, our small, great achievement also evolved, gaining new contours and meanings. Our house, which housed the sewing atelier and the boarding house for students, became a meeting point for women who sought more than a place to live or well-made clothes. It was a space where ideas circulated freely, where young university students discussed politics, women's rights, and dreamed of a different future. In 1982, when Sophia turned 5, I made a decision that surprised many. I went back to school. At 39, I enrolled in a GED program to complete the high school education I had abandoned when I married. Classes were at night, 3 times a week. Robert stayed with our daughter on those days, while I sat among much younger students, absorbing knowledge that had been denied to me in my youth. "It's never too late to learn," my mother would say, now 75, her hair completely white, but her spirit younger than ever. She herself had learned to read better and do more complex calculations with the help of the students we hosted, proving that age was just a number when it came to personal growth. In 1983, a hard blow hit our family. My mother was diagnosed with lung cancer, already at an advanced stage. The doctors gave her a few months to live. The news fell like a bomb on our carefully constructed routine. "Don't cry for me before my time," she told me when she saw my tears. "We have a lot of work ahead." And work we did. In the following months, we organized the business so that it could function without her constant presence. We trained one of the former students, now graduated and working with us, to take over the management of the boarding house. We documented all the recipes that my mother prepared for the girls, her methods of organizing the house, her small secrets that made everything work so well. But it wasn't just the business that needed to be prepared. My mother wanted to leave another type of legacy. On the nights when the pain allowed, she would tell me stories of her childhood in rural Pennsylvania, of her youth, of her marriage to my father. Stories she had never shared before, some sweet, others bitter, all part of who she was, of who I was. "Write it all down," she would ask me. "One day, Sophia will want to know where she came from, who her ancestors were, how we got here." So I wrote, filling notebooks with her memories, preserving her voice, her wisdom, her experiences for future generations. It was during these nocturnal conversations that my mother shared something she had kept for all these years. "I knew about your father's meetings with Harold long before that night in the barn," she confessed. "For months, perhaps years, I noticed the signs, the absences, the lies, but I had nowhere to go. I had no way to support myself alone. So I closed my eyes, pretended not to see." "Why didn't you tell me before?" I asked, surprised by this revelation. "Because you were happy in your ignorance, or at least you seemed to be, and because I was afraid of what we would do if you knew. But when I saw your suffering, your growing distrust day after day, I realized we needed to face the truth together." This confession changed my perspective on our story. What I always saw as a moment of sudden discovery for us both, in reality, was the culmination of years of silence and pain for my mother. Her courage was even greater than I had imagined, not just for confronting the truth, but for bearing it alone for so long. My mother passed away in November 1983 on a rainy autumn afternoon. She departed in peace, in her own bed, holding my hand and Sophia's, surrounded by the students from the boarding house who adored her like a grandmother. Her funeral was simple, but the church was packed. Former students of the boarding house, clients of the atelier, neighbors, friends, all touched in some way by that extraordinary woman who reinvented her life at 58. The mourning was deep, but I didn't allow myself to sink into it. There was a business to manage, a daughter to raise, studies to complete. Besides, I knew that the best way to honor my mother was to continue the legacy we had built together. In 1984, I graduated from high school. At 41, I received my diploma wearing a blue suit that I had sewn especially for the occasion. Robert, Sophia, and the entire team from the atelier and the boarding house were there, applauding when my name was called. It was a moment of immense joy and also of reflection. How many doors could have opened if I had had this opportunity earlier? This question led me to a decision that would again change the direction of our family business. In 1985, with the country breathing the fresh air of a new decade, we transformed one of the rooms of the boarding house into a small classroom. There, 2 nights a week, we offered free literacy classes for adult women, domestic workers, cleaning ladies, factory workers who never had a chance to study. The project started small, with just 5 students. We hired a newly graduated teacher, a former resident of our boarding house, and provided basic materials. Soon the number of interested women grew, and we had to open a second class, then a third. We called the project Eleanor's School in honor of my mother, who valued so much the knowledge that had been denied to her in her youth. In 1987, our small educational project gained recognition from the Municipal Education Department. With this official support, we were able to expand the classes to include basic professional training in sewing, cooking, and domestic administration, skills that could help those women achieve financial independence, just as my mother and I had done. In the same year, Sophia, now 10, began to show interest in the family business. After school, she would sit in the atelier, watching the seamstresses work, making small adjustments on scraps, learning the secrets of the craft that had sustained our family for more than 2 decades. "Grandma would be proud of you," I would say, seeing her handle the scissors with the same precision my mother had. The end of the 80s brought new challenges. The fluctuating economy made it increasingly difficult to keep the business profitable. The prices of fabrics would change frequently. The students struggled to pay for the boarding house. The students of Eleanor's School faced even greater difficulties to survive. We adapted, as we always did. We created a system of exchanges. Some students taught at the school in exchange for a reduction in the boarding house monthly fee. Clients of the atelier who couldn't pay in money offered services or products. The students of the school who learned sewing helped in the production in exchange for advanced learning. It was a small solidarity economy that worked against all odds. In 1990, I turned 47, an age at which many women of my generation were already settled in their routines, resigned to their youth choices. But my journey of transformation continued. Encouraged by Robert and by Sophia, now a teenager, I took the SAT for the College of Education. I studied for months, rereading the GED notebooks, participating in the classes at Eleanor's School, absorbing knowledge where I could. The day of the test was one of the most nervous of my life. Me, a woman of almost 50, sitting among 18-year-olds, competing for a spot at the public university. When the list of approved candidates came out, my name was there. The celebration in our house was emotional. The students from the boarding house, the seamstresses from the atelier, the students from the school, all gathered to celebrate an achievement that for many seemed impossible. The 4 years of college were intense, balancing studies, business, and family. I attended classes in the morning, returned to manage the atelier in the afternoon, helped at the school at night, and still found time to accompany the growth of Sophia, now a determined and conscious young woman, very different from the girl I was at 16. In 1994, at 51, I received my education degree. At the graduation, I looked at the audience and saw faces that represented each chapter of my reinvented life. Robert, my companion of 2 decades, Sophia, my greatest pride, the first students we hosted, now established professionals, the seamstresses who grew with us, the women who learned to read and write in our school, each of them in some way part of the legacy I built from the ashes of a life that crumbled in 1965. The new century was approaching, bringing challenges and opportunities we couldn't even imagine. The internet was beginning to transform businesses. Globalization was modifying the fashion market. New educational technologies were emerging. Once again, we would need to adapt, evolve, reinvent. But if I learned anything in my journey, it was precisely this: the capacity to transform pain into strength, obstacles into opportunities, endings into new beginnings. The betrayal that once shattered my world became the first page of a much larger and more meaningful story than would ever have been possible in the life that was destined for me from birth. Today, at 78, I look back and see not just the losses, but mainly the gains. I see a woman who refused the role of victim and wrote her own destiny. I see a business that sustained generations and opened doors for hundreds of other women. I see a family built not by obligation or convention, but by choice and true love. And when my granddaughters ask me about the secret of a well-lived life, I tell them this story. Not for them to feel anger toward the men who betrayed us, but for them to understand that even in the most painful circumstances, we have the power to choose, to remain in the ashes or to be reborn from them, stronger and freer than we ever were. This is my story, my legacy, my final revenge against all who doubted that two women alone, without formal education, without resources, could not only survive but thrive and transform lives. The greatest lesson I learned, and that I leave for you, is this. True freedom begins when we find the courage to live our own truth, no matter the price. Before I say goodbye, I wanted to thank all of you who have accompanied me on this journey of memories. If my story touched your heart in some way, please leave your like, subscribe to the channel to hear other stories like mine, and share with someone who might need to hear that it's always possible to start over. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever experienced a situation where you needed to find strength to rebuild your life. Your stories deserve to be heard too. Thank you very much, and until next time.